Good to see you again.
Hello.
This meeting that picks up. We talk loud enough if you have questions, or we may have questions.
And is there an automatic mute on this, or do I have to unmute anything? I don't
No, you're on right now.
Okay. Oh, there it is. And it looks like we've got Brent.
Morning.
Morning.
Morning, Brain. Morning.
All right, looks like it's 8:30. Boyd Johnson, School Board Chair. We've got a presentation today about the referendum planning, and I guess I'll turn it over to you folks.
Good morning. Yeah, Jeff, do you want us to just get started?
Yeah, you know everyone. I did put introductions on here if we want to go around so you know who the board members are. And
I guess we can do that. Again, I'm Boyd Johnson. I won't bother turning everything, but go ahead and just say your name out loud.
I'm Carla Rabita. Jim Lyon.
Corinne Trask.
Lynn Ellis.
Robin Sunstegard.
Are you able to hear everyone?
Yep, we can hear everybody. Matthew Hammer, District's Municipal Advisor. I've got my colleague Jen Chapman here as well, so she'll be sharing her screen and kind of driving stuff and as we talk through the presentation. Brent?
And I'm Brent Dahman, architect with Widseth.
Okay. So,
So good morning, everybody. We have some information just that we'll go through. I think with the agenda, we'll get started just to kind of talk about roles and responsibilities as we go through this process. We're the district's financial advisor, so we'll be providing all the analysis for any tax impact information and work on that communication side of the project. When it comes to a project like this where we're looking at multiple different types of ballot questions, each one of them is going to have a little different idiosyncrasy with the tax impact analysis on who's going to pay the taxes, what property tax bases maybe will be excluded, for example, in the operating referendum, and then some of the implications when we start looking at an overall school building bond project, depending on the size and working within the district's existing debt. So our role really is to provide that analysis from the number side. Winseth can kind of speak to the other side when it comes to the construction project. But with that, our fees for service, I think they were included in that information. It comes with, we charge $2,800 for the operating referendum and a capital project levy. And then when it gets into the building bond question, those fees for the operating referendum and capital project levy are charged regardless of outcome. The building bond component, those fees would be charged if the project was approved by voters. There's a fee that comes along with facilitating the debt issuance side to get the funding for the project. And that fee ranges, in your case, it depends on bond size amount, but it'd be about 0.8% of the bond amount on a $7 million bond. So if the bond amount gets a little smaller, it's going to be a little bit larger, or if it's bigger, it obviously gets smaller. So that gives you a sense of the cost from our perspective, but we want to be a resource for the district as part of this process. So that means attending meetings where you guys see fit from the standpoint of any communications that need to go out with community meetings to the public so we can be available to answer questions, specifically when we start talking about some of the different property tax bases, when you'll have seasonal or cabin or resort owners that maybe have questions and egg owners that have specific questions about tax implications for the project. So we can answer any questions on that component as part of it. Otherwise, we can let Brent kind of speak to Winseth's role in the process.
Yeah, on our side, we would essentially be a resource on any of the technical aspects as it might relate to construction, especially if anything coming out of that facility assessment report that we completed last fall, we'd be a resource for that. If the board decides to pursue a referendum, we would assist with putting together the required review and comment document that needs to get submitted to the state. We would coordinate that with the Ellers group, and then also we would have to coordinate with the district itself, getting some key information there. We'd also assist with putting together any graphics that might be needed for community presentations, or anything that might get put in a brochure, or anything that might get sent out. We can assist with putting together those graphics. Assist with putting together budget estimates. A lot of that was completed with that facility assessment, what the cost of that work potentially could be. But if any of that scope changed or got reduced or increased, we could reassess those numbers, take another look at them, and make sure they're up to date. And then obviously we would take part in any board meetings, community meetings, basically, again, to be that resource on any of the technical aspects. And that's really the architectural services that we would provide. We did also propose to assist with communication services. Sometimes that involves putting together videos or other marketing materials to help convey what the referendum might include, help prioritize what those key messages might be, and work with staff to put those together. So we put together that proposal and submitted that to Jeff a couple weeks ago. So that's, I think, right now in front of you at this time.
Yeah, and I'll just add one thing that I didn't touch on is we also will prepare a tax impact or a tax calculator website for the district, and really that is the purpose of that is so that a property owner could go out and get a tax impact for their specific property, and have a real good idea before they would go to the ballot of what their tax impact would be for the proposed referendum. So are there any questions with any of that information before we kind of move on in the agenda?
I got a couple of questions. One, Mike Reed, do you have a copy of the tax impact? Okay, so I've been talking to a local realtor anyway, just want to make sure those people have that in their hands, so we'll get you one of those. And two, not trying to sound like I'm battling a monopoly here, but you offer that up as though it's a sales pitch. What do we have as alternatives when we move forward to this? You guys have obviously already done, I'm looking at the WITSEF part of it, the $15,000 worth of architectural services. So we're sort of already in the pool with you guys on that one. On the Eller side, do you guys always work together? I mean, is that just a standard co-op there?
No, we're an independent municipal advisor, so we work with any architect or engineering firm, right? So our role is to, we're a fiduciary to the district, right? So we're an independent financial advisor, and even by law, we're required to make sure we're acting in the best interest of the school district, right? So our primary role is to provide information for you, the board, the taxpayers, so they can go and make a decision on what they want to do as part of the project as they move forward on the tax implication and what the best financial way or strategy to move forward with is with the plan.
So as an objective fiduciary, which I appreciate, we're already contracted to that point. This is how it's done, I guess is my question. I mean, we're following through, nodding our head on what you're doing, but I think you're leading us. I mean, you'd offer an alternative if you thought there was a better one.
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay.
Yeah, but our goal is to give you those, if there is alternatives, right? So that you guys are aware of what those options are.
Okay, so when you throw out a money number, we just nod our head, really. I mean, it's not like we can go shopping around for a better price on a public financial advisory position.
Well, I'm sure there's alternatives, like from that perspective, but we always think we're acting in your best interest. We have a long-term relationship with you, right? So we know your district well, and really our role is to provide you that information, right? To make the decisions that you guys need to make as you move forward. One, in this capacity of trying to generate some additional revenue for your budget, right? And we always think of that as priority number one, is we've got to operate. But then two, what the best path forward to putting a financial plan together to cover some facilities projects that you need to get covered as well.
Okay.
But we do, like, just overall, we work with about 70% of school districts in Minnesota. We work with districts in the metro area, all the way out to a lot of the districts up in your area across the state. So there's about 330 school districts statewide, and we work with roughly 70%.
And I'm playing devil's advocate here, so you can be as defensive as you want about that, but just covering the bases, what do the other 30% do? Do they do it themselves? I mean, is that something a small school district undertakes to save dollars, says, oh, because I look at the cost here, it doesn't seem that big for the money I'm looking to get, to get on board here.
Yeah, typically they're working with somebody, right? Because the tax, just from the standpoint, the taxes in Minnesota and funding in Minnesota are pretty complicated, right? So when you go out to the public, you want to make sure that you're providing accurate information. So typically there's a third party involved in some way. And not everybody looks exactly like us from the standpoint of being an independent advisor. There's other firms that have a little different priority, but we consider we're independent, right? So just like you'd have a fiduciary for your financial, as a financial advisor for a personal situation, we're acting as that same fiduciary from the standpoint of for the school district in this case.
Okay, thanks. Any other questions? Okay, that's it for questions.
Yeah, so I think just initially, we prepared some initial draft tax impact analysis to get the conversation started, and I think the main point of all of this, right, is this is a starting point, and talking with Jeff, I think we're in the upper end, right, so there's room potentially to move this down, but we wanted to give us a starting point for our discussion today. And really goal number one is to generate some operating dollars for the district for maintaining programs or covering the budget deficit that the district is looking at. And there's really two options to do that with for a school district in Minnesota. The first is what most people are familiar with as an operating referendum. And those funds can be used for anything, right? So anything in the general fund operation, paying staff, it's really considered extra general education revenue for school districts. About 60, closer to 70% of school districts have some form of an operating referendum currently. Your school district current authority is around $24 per student. And the state cap right now for school districts that are not considered a sparsity district is about $2,200 per student. And you'll see in some of that analysis we have prepared, some of the regional districts are considered what we call sparsity districts, so they're above that number. Lancaster comes to mind as one of those districts. So when we look at our tax impact analysis, that was one of the scenarios we looked at generating some additional revenue for operations. The other is a capital project levy. Capital project levies are often referred to as technology levies. Specifically more in the metro area, specifically they'll even refer to it as a technology levy, but they can be used for other things as well. Bus purchases, other things that can be funded out of the operating capital budget. And the reason why we like to look at both is each tax base is different, and we'll see that play out in the tax information that Jen's going to share. But your property tax base has about 25% roughly is made up of seasonal rec property, and about another 20% is made up of ag property. And those two property tax bases don't pay taxes on an operating referendum, which then leads to increased taxes when we start looking at an operating referendum for the residential and commercial tax base. When we start looking at the way most taxes are spread, they're spread on what we call net tax capacity, and that's how the capital project levy is spread. So it picks up that 50% of your tax base that's excluded, and we'll really see how that plays out in the tax information. So Jen, are you ready to share your screen?
Yes. All right. Can you see this?
Gotta enlarge it, I can see it.
Yep.
I can make it bigger here too.
So this is pulling together, we had talked high level when we were out at the end of February about what we call the smackdown of the difference between a capital project levy and operating referendum and how they're taxed. But in this scenario, we pulled a hypothetical scenario together where we would be asking three questions potentially. And you can see how the tax impact lays out. So the capital project levy at $300,000, talking with Jeff, it sounds like the district has enough funds that are currently considered capital project levy costs that could be shifted over to a capital project levy and in essence free up the general fund budget. If I just work off of a $150,000 home, you can see that has a $44 annual tax impact to generate about $300,000 a year. The question two then is an additional $993 per student for an operating referendum question. That generates about $400,000 annually. In that, on that a residential home, you can see that comes with about $164 a year of a tax impact. And then I think the important thing to note there is you can see how the ag property and seasonal rec property is exempt from paying taxes. So that's really the driver of why that tax impact on the residential home is going up, because 50% of the tax base comes off of paying taxes on that operating referendum question. I know there's been a discussion at the legislature this year talking high level that they're talking about providing some potential aid. We don't think anything's going to happen at the legislative level this year, but they're calling it tax-based replacement aid to help some of these districts like yours that have quite a bit of seasonal rec to provide some aid to offset some of these questions for asking operating, because the burden just increases on the residential homeowner for an operating question for a district that has a large portion that's made up of operating agricultural property and seasonal rec. And then finally, the school building bond, you can see if we work off that $150,000 home, on a $7 million bond, that comes with about $54 a year of a tax impact to increase the total taxes to about $262. So if we look at that high level, when we look at where you were on a comparison last time on those documents, you currently had the lowest taxes in pretty much in the surrounding area at about on a $185,000 home it was. What we showed was $596. That would go up by about $330 in this scenario, and you'd be middle, not to the total upper of the pack, but you'd be kind of in the upper 2/3 at this level. So still not going to the highest level in the area, to give you some context. I think the other thing to note here is that those agricultural properties with the school building bond, you can see that generating $7 million for an ag owner is actually less in the bond amount than what the capital project levy question is. That's because those tax impacts assume the ag to school credit. So for any school district that has a school building bond or outstanding debt, those property owners get the ag credit on those debt service levies. This accounts for that in the tax impact analysis, and you can see on a $3,000 acre, right, that's about 21 cents per acre of property for a total of a 78 cents increase in total for the three questions. And again, this is a starting point. We just wanted to give you some context of what this potentially could look like. From this question, the operating question, number 2, that has to stand on its own. Because it's spread in a different tax base, you can't combine these questions into one question. Potentially Q1 and Q2, they could be combined into one question, albeit in your situation, we likely would consider those separate just because goal number 1 is to increase some operating revenue for the budget.
So I just want to make sure that was clear, Matthew. So question 2 has to be on its own.
Yep.
The operating referendum, and then but 1 and 3 could be combined.
Potentially could be combined, yeah. So when we look at the second scenario, this is where we started to just give you a little sense to show, basically we're generating the same amount of money here, but we've increased the capital project levy by $100,000 to generate $400,000, and then we lowered the operating referendum question to generate around $300,000. And the same analysis plays out. You can see that the tax impact on that $150,000 home comes down about $30 compared to the previous scenario. $234 annual increase for taxes on a residential home. And then you can see how that plays out across the board. And really that's just because of the mix of where the property taxes are paid, right? We're decreasing the burden on the residential home in this scenario by generating the same amount of revenue. We also provided high-level the timeline. I know Jeff had kind of worked off of this timeline as well. The key deadlines to consider here is the review and comment in the last legislative session was moved up from the standpoint of reporting requirements, so it's really moved up the timeline for when it has to be submitted to the department. A review and comment is required for a school building construction project, but it's also required for a capital project levy if you spend a penny outside of technology, and it's going to be over $2 million during the life of that capital project levy. So in this case, if we were looking to generate $300,000 a year, and if we assumed it was at the max term of 10 years, we'd be over that $2 million. So there'd be a requirement for a capital project levy, the capital project levy to be included in that same review and comment. And it could just be included in the same document if there was going to be a school building bond question included as part of the referendum. So that'll be the key deadline. The board has to approve that before it gets sent. It can be as simple as a motion approving the superintendent to move forward with submitting the review and comment, but it has to be approved ahead of that June submission 28th date, because we have to provide the Department of Education 60 days to return it. And we're really working off, there's a timeline for that published review and comment that comes back from MDE to be put in the paper, which is September 6th to September 18th. So it's a pretty tight window where it has to hit the paper so that folks can see the review and comment that has come back from the department. The other key deadline in this is the August 23rd date. August 23rd is the final date for the school board to call for an election. You guys are running a school board election too, so you're going to have some dates likely ahead of this. And I think in Jeff's timeline, the target was more of a July calling for the election, but August 23rd is the deadline for a school building or school referendum election for either an operating referendum, capital project levy, or a school building election. And then November 5th, in this case, it would be when the election would be held. We would coordinate with the district's attorney on our end to prepare all the legal documents. That's another part of our role, is to coordinate with the district's legal counsel to make sure that all of the proper documentation is created for the school board to call for the election and hold the election. And then with an operating referendum, there is also some publication requirements that will get outlined as part of that process as well. So any questions, we can pause, and if there's any questions at this point in time.
So the costs I see, and I could pull it up on my computer again, but $20,000 roughly we're talking about if you wanted to do a special election. Like if we postponed this for a year and said, let's do it next year so we're not caught in that miasma of a national election. The $20,000 is effectively just a printing cost. Is that where that comes in, or why would that be so much more significant in a non-election year?
Yeah, that you're really getting the benefit of the county helping you run the election, right? I think is what your question is, right? So if the district is running their election on their own, then they have to bear the burden of holding that election if there's not an election going on. So in this case, there's a benefit to the school district from, at least from a cost perspective, right? Because there's going to be a national election going on, and all of that's going to be handled at the county level.
that with that $20,000 cost, that would probably encompass, printing ballots, whatever legal, paying for, election officials, that sort of thing?
Yeah, that's, that, and that number I think Jeff pulled, right, but that seems in the ballpark of what I've seen in other places, right? It really depends on how many counties and how many polling places you have open. But that is a cost, right, that if you're in an off year that the school district has to, and there's not a overall election going on where with the county or some other municipality where you can share the costs, right, that then the school district is bearing the election costs on their own.
Yeah, that number comes from the county. I just asked for an estimate on what the cost would be if we did it on an off-election year, so. It's not an exact dollar, but it's just kind of, yeah, all the mailing, postage,
You
everything.
said that, number comes right from the county.
Yeah.
Yep.
And obviously you guys have a board election going this year too, so there's something on the ballot for the school district this year too.
When we consider, and this, I'm asking some naive questions, and I apologize for that, but when we consider, for instance, the capital projects levy distinctly, if we did that singularly, right, not in conjunction with these other potential referendum efforts, how does an ag person, well, an ag person seems to be obvious, how does a non-voting member of our community have an impact on that decision? For instance, a property owner from somebody who lives in Minneapolis but has property up here, their taxes potentially go up, but do they have any real say in that matter other than just call me up? And
No, you have to be a registered voter in the school district to be able to vote during the election.
so really they
So if you
are
don't,
a lame duck or whatever the proper political term is for that situation.
yeah, that's just the way state law works, right? You have to be a registered voter to be able to impact or have a say in the election for the school district. In the school district.
That's just for operational, right? Or operational referendum.
No, that's just for the capital project, but yes, there's two different.
So they're not affected, the same people you're talking about are not affected.
Yeah, and that would apply to any of those questions, right?
Correct.
They can't vote on the board election either, right? So they have, with any of these questions, you have to be a registered voter in the school district to be able to have a say in the election.
Could you maybe put your chart back up real quick?
Yep.
I'd like to ask a quick question if I could.
Sure, Woody.
The three types of properties that were mentioned were ag, seasonal, and residential that are going to be affected by these levies. Is there going to be any
Can't hear.
commercial properties?
Commercial on there.
Yeah, commercial's on there.
Oh, it is? Okay, I can't,
Hard to see that. I don't know if you can enlarge that board at all, but
that's all right.
Would they be able
Yeah,
to?
we put commercial on there. I didn't speak to it. I should have.
They break it down. Maybe we can get you a copy of it and
Is there,
everything.
can I reach this online?
Yes, it's
It
on
should
the,
be on the
It's on our
school.
school
on the
Yep.
website. Yep.
Thank you, Jeff.
you just keep in mind that these,
2025.
this is just a starting point. This is not set in stone. These are the dollars that we're asking to
Right.
consider, so it's just the starting
Believe
point.
me, Amy
Just to
and I
give us
are
an
very
idea.
general about this. It's
Yeah.
not gonna be specific.
Yeah, so, I just don't want anyone saying, hey, they're asking for this and that, and when it's not, that hasn't been decided yet, so we're just starting the process.
Who pays what is decided though, for the blocks, the different groups. So. Okay, that answered that question for you. Okay, continue, I guess.
Yeah, so really, I think the next steps will obviously be defining scope, right? And that'll lead into the ballot question development. In regards to a capital project levy and a school building bond, there's more flexibility with the way those ballots can be drafted. The operating referendum ballots are really prescribed by statute, so there's not a lot of flexibility in the wording of those. In essence, it says the district's going to ask to increase their operating referendum authority by a certain amount to increase their general education revenue. And we can get you some of those samples. But as we start thinking about moving forward, we'll be helping draft some language in regards to the ballots. We do have some samples that we had included here, and I don't know, Jen, if we need to bring them all up, but they're in the information you have just to give you some context of what a capital project levy ballot could look like. We've picked some of your neighbors, like Grigla, for example, as a pretty broad one in their language, and then other questions are more specific to technology. But I think in your case, it would benefit us to keep your ballot question pretty flexible from the standpoint of what could be covered, whether it's technology, acquisition of vehicles, those types of things to provide that relief for your operating budget. The school building bond question, that'll be determined based on the scope that would come out of whatever would be decided to move with WinSeth, and we would be providing some sample ballot questions based on that after we get through some of these other meetings as we move forward to define further the scope of what that question would look like. But just as a starting point, we had given you some just sample questions of what a capital project levy could look like, just to give you a sense of what that would potentially be looking like for a voter when they get to the ballot.
So Matt, I have a question. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
I know some districts have gone to putting an inflationary piece into,
Yep.
Is that just the operating levy, or can you do that with the capital project so that there's that? That's
a question, and I will say that school districts in Minnesota it's far more common now to have an inflationary increase on your operating referendum question. The school district doesn't figure out that inflationary factor. That's figured at the state level. They use the consumer price index, and when they're adjusting their cap number, that 2,200 that I referenced, that goes up each year, that's the same factor that gets applied to any school district that has an inflationary adjustment to their operating referendum on their ballot. And simply what that says is you would say, you're voting increase your operating referendum authority by so much per student that will be subject to a rate of inflation moving forward, starting in whatever fiscal year that would be, or calendar or pay year. But that is becoming far more common, and I will say it's a lot more common, especially to try to offset some of the declining enrollment that's been happening statewide in a lot of school districts, right, to provide some increases in those per student amounts over a period of time. On the capital project levy, that question is actually a tax rate. So that is portrayed as a tax rate. You can see that in the sample question. So as the district's tax base moves up and down, by default, that revenue stream will increase and decrease based on the tax base changes in the school district. So if the tax base of the district overall goes up, the district would get a little bit more revenue. We have seen it obviously go the other way, where if your tax base declines, then you lose revenue at the same time. So that's a tax rate levy, and it's one of the only it's actually the only levy a school district has that would be a tax rate levy that would be subject to changes in the tax base.
Okay, thank you. Then I have one other question. Can you clarify the definition for sparsity district? I know Lake of the Woods, we do get some sparsity revenue. But can you clarify what districts, what that threshold is to be considered a sparsity?
Yeah, so it's defined by how far apart your schools are, and if you're getting sparsity revenue, you're a sparsity district. And there's a square miles calculation that's done that defines how far the nearest, I think it's high school is. I have to look back to be specific on that. But if you're generating sparsity revenue, then you'd be a sparsity district.
Yeah.
And then for sparsity districts, you're not limited to the cap on the operating referendum, on the operating referendum allowance. So districts that are, like, for example, you'll see Lancaster has a per student authority that's over $3,000 per kid. That's because they can be above the cap because they're considered a sparsity district. And that's really how far it is to get kids from place to place, right? And that's the reason why MD allows for authorities, just because of the economies of scale. Those districts need more revenue to operate.
I guess I'll bring up something, and then you may be covering this later on, so forgive me if I'm jumping the gun. So keeping the ballot questions a little on the vague side makes sense, but as far as successful referendums, if the school district presents, like for instance, the building bond, if you need windows, and that's going to be $1 million, and all these and certain repairs, has there been, is it more likely to pass if that is addressed in the informational part?
Yeah, I think that's definitely a consideration, right? As you start thinking about the project scope of, especially what gets discussed with the public, from the standpoint of those projects. So it can be as vague as deferred maintenance, or whatever we would use for that term. Not everybody knows what deferred maintenance means, right, or what specifically that is, but it can be delineated as maintenance for the school buildings, right, to keep it broad. But literally the ballot question could read acquisition and betterment of school sites and facilities, but I really think there's a balance from our perspective that you've got to provide some information to the voter when they go to make their decision, so they have an idea, specifically when we're talking capital project levies and building bonds, of what the school district plans to fund with the money that the voters are approving. And so there's a balance of too much, right, that restricts you from the standpoint of the school district to specifically those projects, that maybe there's some things that you haven't thought about that you need to address, right, as part of it, and you don't want to tie your hands so much. But there's also the need to be able to articulate enough so when somebody is going to vote and sees the ballot, they know exactly what the district's planning to do with the money. And we, obviously, when we get to that point, when that scope is determined, then we would bring back draft ballot options so that people can see what that would look like. And I think some of that could get delved out in some of these community meetings a little bit too, as you kind of get some feedback on the potential projects of how that ballot would get worded. So that's the information we had. I think when we start thinking timelines, I know, Jeff, you had prepared, and I don't know if you want to kind of speak to kind of what you're thinking for next steps in this process.
Yeah, and I put in, this is just a rough draft started that it was included in the board packet, and I tried to pull off the timelines for MDE and all this other stuff that we have to do. But I think for the board, one of our hard deadlines would be the May 20th board approval. By that time, we need to have determined what projects we want to ask the taxpayers to fund as far as the bond levy, if we decide to do that. Determine whether we're going to do capital projects levy or an operating levy or a combination of the two. So we don't have a lot of time to kind of get our ducks in a row so that we can go to the next steps. And I would say, Matt and Brent, the May 20th, that would give you enough time to have the review and comment and everything by the June 28th deadline.
Yeah, I would feel good about that timeline.
Okay.
Yeah, same on our end.
So I guess our work here would be scheduling some public board meetings, having some working sessions to go through the assessment, the facility assessment. I think there's some projects that take more priority than others. I know we have to look at the tax impact and what we're gonna ask our local citizens to take on. So that might take a few meetings to go through that and determine what the priority is as far as facility upkeep and repairs and stuff like that. And again, also with running an operating levy and what that would look like. So at some point we need to kind of come up with a schedule on how we want to do those meetings and how we want to present this and what makes the most sense and be most efficient moving forward. So I think the next step would be to schedule another meeting prior to our April board meeting to go over this and start filling in the blanks. And
do we have the numbers, like the building, do we have the financial numbers needed already, or are we pretty much set to go?
I think we're pretty much set as far as the financials for each of these pieces, yeah.
Okay, yeah, so then
You know.
it's just a matter of deciding how much to ask for, I guess.
Yep.
Is there a feeling or excuse me, is there a way you determine what it is that the tax base is willing to sustain as well? I mean, I'm looking at this, when I look at it to begin with, we have some immediate needs, obviously, then we have some a little bit longer term needs, but I think my question would be, what do the people want to fund? When you hear like a Lancaster funding $3,000 or whatever it is per child, compared to our $24 a child, obviously there needs to be an adjustment, but I'm not sure we have that financial ability, even though we can compare ourselves to that school district. I don't think financially we can say the same things about our tax base. So that's what I'm curious about before we make those decisions. Is there a way we determine what it is the public actually wants or can feel they can handle before we make those decisions? Or is that putting a cart before a horse?
Well, I think that's where you schedule the public input meetings. I don't know if Brent or Matt have any suggestions on a process to get public input on some of these decisions, how that would play into it.
You want to go first, Brent, or on the?
Well, as far as like prioritizing like the building improvements,
Yeah, I think I envision having some public meetings where this information is presented to the board and have some way of gathering their input on, yeah, we think this is an important project, or no, this is a waste of money type thing.
yeah, I think you'd want to have that series of meetings, whether it's the board or the community, because there's different people are going to certainly prioritize things maybe differently. You might look at it from, okay, which is on the building, which is most important as far as maintaining the quality of the building, the roof or the windows, extending the life, where, maybe somebody in the public might have a different viewpoint of what's important to them. So I think it's good to have those meetings to get that feedback, and then the board can discuss it and, ultimately make the decision on what is the priority for the district. So I think gathering that input is necessary.
For sure, and then I think on the operating side, right, is your budget is kind of dictating a little bit of at least priority of trying to generate some additional revenue for operations. And I think from a timeline perspective, right, just so people are kind of aware of, so this would get, if the levy was approved, if the referendum was approved in November, it would go on the tax rolls for taxes payable 25, and the first year of revenue for the school district would be FY 26. So we're a year, like next fiscal year, right, there's no new revenue for sure coming for FY 25. The first year of new revenue would be 26 if the ballot was if the voters approved the referendum in November, and if the school board went out again sometime, if they waited, and the election wasn't held till 25, then the first year revenue would be 27, fiscal 27. So that just gives you some context, right, that from an operating perspective, there's definitely not any new revenue coming to the school district at least till 26.
So Matt, can you clarify, is that just with the operating referendum, there's that leg, or is that with all of the referendums, bond?
The school building bonds, that would get sold, that would align with whatever the construction schedule would be. So that, what I'm referring to is revenue for general fund operations, right?
Yeah.
That would be the capital project levy and the operating referendum.
Yeah. Thank you.
So.
The school building bond, that would get financed, right? And we would want to align the financing to when the projects would start.
So I have one question about the operating. So when you say fiscal year 26, that would end in 26, the year that ends in 26?
Yep.
June 30, 26, yep. So July 1 of 25 through June 30th of 26.
Just want to clarify, make sure we had that right in our minds.
So we'd get the money July 1 of 2026? If
20.
July 1 of 25 would be,
25.
Yeah,
yeah.
that's when our fiscal year starts.
Right, but it's not being paid in. Okay.
And we will
No.
get the money from the taxes paid
In May
Yeah.
of 2025,
Yeah.
so we'd receive.
Yeah.
Okay.
So there would be no new money for next school year, 24,
Right.
25. The new money would come in if it's past 25, 26.
Any other questions? Small audience, any from the audience? Okay, I guess no more questions from us.
Okay. Well, we'll be working with next steps on you. So, Jeff, you can connect with us, and as we kind of define what those next steps with public input and those pieces, and we can be available for some of that discussion as well.
Okay, I will keep you guys in the loop as we move forward. And I think the very next step before we leave today is to see if we can set up another working session for the board to at least start filling in the next steps and start formulating a plan.
At what point do we start accruing fees, or are we already in that process through Ehlers and the?
From us, you're not accruing fees until the school board calls the election. So.
Okay, thank you.
And then Brett, a question to you. You used the word sometimes when you said sometimes school districts like to get a little more into it, for instance, with the video presentation that you talked about. Seems like a lot of money, but at the same time, do you look at a school district as small as ours where I'd like to believe that the sale of this referendum, whatever path we take, comes from me going out and actually talking to somebody and saying, this is what we need to do. Do you see that as a necessity to make something like this happen?
No, and that's kind of why we broke up our proposal the way it is, because not every district needs or wants to do that, and especially if you get into wanting to do some sort of videos or something, that's where the bigger effort is. So that's why we broke a lot of that out. So if you didn't do that or wanted to handle that on your own, it certainly doesn't have to involve us. That's why we just broke our proposal apart, so you could pick and choose what you wanted.
But in terms of your past efforts, is there a benefit to doing that, pulling something more formal together, like a video online thing or a pamphlet? I think that was part of the discussion, or something that you could put in somebody's hand.
We've probably seen it, we've probably done it more on larger referendums where you might be getting into building additions or new buildings, new facilities, where you have a bigger story to tell. With as far as at least with the building related items potentially here, you know, a lot of it is LTFM related, you know, and you might get as much benefit as with inviting the public in for tours or something, and you could specifically take them to these areas and see exactly what the issues are. You know, if you can handle it that way, that's one way to do it. You know, another way is videos, but certainly, you know, if you're doing brochures or a web page or something, you can handle a lot of that too, just with images and photographs too, which would be separate from a video production.
Any other questions? I guess we don't have anything.
Okay.
Well,
Well, thanks, everyone. We'll be connected with Jeff over the next number of weeks and months, so, and let us know if anything comes to mind as you, and circle that back through Jeff after we get off the line here as well.
Okay, very good. Thank you very much.
Awesome, thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good day.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
So these guys just for service to help people apply for a rental? Is that what they are, or is that where they?
Ellers, we contract throughout the year with them
To advise us
to
on?
advise us. So when things change in the market, they'll let us know that we might want to refinance our bonds. So they do, I don't know if it's quarterly, they'll send us notice that if it benefits our taxpayers and the district to refinance a bond, they'll alert us to that and run us through the process. In fact,
They're not involved in budgets and stuff like that on an annual basis?
our in-house budget, no, they're not involved in the day in, day out budget. It's more of the investments.
I was doing this, just a quick dirty math on kind of what your sheet showed there. This proposal cost me about $8 or $10 grand a year, personally. To make up for shortfalls in the budget. Is that what it
Well,
is?
part of it is the facilities, replacing the windows and that type of thing.
Do we have a fund for that? We've been setting aside money for windows and roof and
We have long-term facility maintenance, but that doesn't, there's not enough revenue to cover replacement of all the windows. If you look at some of the sidewalks. that
there isn't
we're
a
in.
specific fund that's been accruing over the last 20 years to
No.
address that.
The way we've been going with this, I mean, again, it's at $24 a kid compared to other school districts around. Everyone else is paying way more in bonds, referendums, everything else than we are. We've been kicking this can down the road. Now we gotta pay. There's no other better way to put it. We have not, we run our budget in such a way that we don't have enough money to sock money away and things like that. So that's, and with the decrease in enrollment and everything else, I mean, that's been our funding right there. I mean, that's the big one from the state. And as it decreases, we get less money. Now we gotta pay the piper.
What do we get from the state for revenue from per student, roughly?
Is it 7,000 and change roughly?
7,300
Yeah.
per student, and that doesn't change. What I think is interesting that we brought up, and it's a learning experience, but when the power line went through, the county here, just recently raised the tax base fairly significantly, but the school district doesn't get any more based on that increase. It still falls on the local taxpayers, Mike Reed, for instance, to compensate us when the building ages, because the only difference is the state pays less, the county pays more. I mean, it's basically a balance, does that make sense? And then the state's contribution becomes less when the county has a power line go through and they can afford to pay more. And I think that that's something that, I'm not gonna point out individuals, but as I've gone through the whole county process, I think this is news to everybody. I mean, just because you can sell more houses and raise the tax rate, or the property values, doesn't really increase what we're getting on a per pupil basis. We're sort of an island of financial success or failure here.
But you are getting a percentage of that gross tax, right?
We're getting $7,300 per kid.
That's from the state.
From the state.
Now, from local property tax, and this threw me, because I guess I was thinking it was a straight percentage as well, because valuations go up, well, our income went down. It's like, well, why did that happen? Turns out it's not a straight percentage, they apply that same pupil formula to the local tax base as well. So again, we got a double hit because of the declining enrollment. So valuations were going up, but our income was going down.
Even though you're paying more on your house this year, the school is getting less.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's where your discrepancy's coming from. This has been going on for a long time, right?
Especially with the decline.
You'd think, and then I guess in the districts in the inner city, or the bigger districts, and I'm thinking of the Edinas or whatever, the suburbs, they do get certain increases that we don't see as a rural district, and I'm not even sure how that works when you talk about the confusion of school finance. But the long-term facilities maintenance that Jeff's talking about, we have a contribution that we make each year to making sure this building stays, but it's just, we don't have the money anymore. When we hired Witseth to come in and do, and I could show you that, Jeff's got it there, but paid them $15,000 to come in and tell us, what is it we gotta do in the next 2 years, 5 years, just because we were really starting to get behind on a 30-year-old building, and you know that. And so, things like windows, and it's $1 million project, it's, what was it, $8,000 a window or something like that, over 60 windows or whatever. Little things, but they add up, and so we're trying to overcome that by, now asking the public, hey, we got a nice building, we don't have the finance we used to, because we have, since my daughter graduated, I think we're about 30% less in terms of student population.
So is that
How many people came, or how many kids did we get from this when it closed?
7, was it?
I want to
In
say
the
11.
elementary?
It was even before, like when, it was about even, give or take like 1 or 2 when Indus was open, as far as our kids that went there and their kids that came here. It was
Yeah, as
almost
far
a
as new students, I'd have to check the list. I think it was 8 to 11 kids.
How many did they have that were dislocated?
I don't know what their total.
They had a little under 100 kids total.
Most of them
that
were
attended there,
open
and
enrolled.
20-ish of them were actually from that school district, and the other approximately 80 came from outside of there.
What did we do to try to attract that revenue?
I think most of the kids, from what I understand, from people I know that live in that area, went, Little Fork, I think, got quite a few.
Little Fork,
But more of them
Falls.
live that direction than live this direction.
Because we have a revenue problem, right? And we're trying to Dave Ramsey ourselves into prosperity here, but that doesn't work. We have a revenue problem. Increasing taxes doesn't help bring people to the community either. So, I think that's a real situation. So we had 150 kids that were kicked out of school. We got 11 kids out of that.
It was 90, not 150. I mean, that's almost 100%.
So were we romancing those little revenue streams over here? That would have been important.
It felt
But you have to keep in
geographically, though,
mind-
Mike, I think there was not even much of a question, we talked about that, and as soon as it was happening, not trying to sound like a vulture picking at a carcass, but said, how many kids can show up here? And you get it from the locals, from the Indus locals, they made it pretty clear, these kids are going here, these kids are going here, and these kids are going here. And as such, there's an effort right now being made to redistrict that school district because the size of it has become cumbersome. They can't operate independently in terms of their population bases. It's just because there are decisions being made, and I just don't quote me on it, but on a North Home end basis versus an Indus basis based on the number of people who are down there. Things have sort of fallen apart geographically there.
Do we feel confident we're running this school as efficiently as we can financially?
Yes.
There's a lot of rumors I hear. I haven't been to this meeting, and I appreciate you guys doing what you're doing, but you hear a lot of stuff out in the community right now.
I've heard some of it, and it's amazing how wrong a lot of it is.
Did we pay $100,000 in health coverage for past employees?
Yep.
So that was a FUBAR, right? Who's accountable for that?
Well, it's a public meeting. I'm not sure we can start pointing fingers.
I know that you won't, because that's how this operates, but at the end of the day, somebody needs to be accountable. Those are big mistakes. Who got their walking papers? for me, if it was $100,000,
I can't say,
they're gone, so.
we can't.
But I think the community wants to know that. Before you ask me to give you more money, I would sure like to know where are those mistakes from? Why would I give more money to somebody that's mismanaged the last money I gave? It's not pointing fingers, it's just the truth.
I don't know how much we can save, but people are not because of that.
No.
Are there?
Yes.
Because I own this school,
Yeah.
and you own the school.
Yep.
So where's that accountability to the people who own the school? They want to know. I think it's going to be a hard sell in a referendum. Hard sell.
That's unfortunate.
What's the other
But-
option?
But we talked about this,
Fail and our
we
kids
talked
don't.
about this
I have a 3-year-old.
before some of those snafus with some staffing issues. I mean, this is not a new discussion with the school board. Go back to May of 2020, we had a special meeting.
And we just held 2 public meetings and talked about this over and over and over. I mean,
But does the public know?
that's what we're working
Probably
on
not.
right
That's one
now.
of the things we have to.
I think you got to answer that question.
We don't
before
know
you
if they
answer.
don't show up though.
And that's true.
What's that?
They don't know if they don't show up. Like
Right.
I've come to,
But you can put it in the paper, you can let people know, right? So
Yep.
I think before you talk about a strategy to sell this referendum to somebody, it's going to have to include what happened.
Yep.
People are just
And
going to
you're
say, I'm not going to just throw their money after that. That's what this looks like.
Yeah, when you ask them to show up, unfortunately, whether it's at probably every school district, people don't show up. They create their own information. So I think that's where the board is looking at, like, exactly what you're saying, Mike. And I know you're asking hard questions, not with aggression. You're just telling us like it is. We got to get out there and let the public know what's going on and what we intend to do it differently. And we got about 3 months, 4 months to really get that figured out. Because August is pretty much the cut date there.
but it also has to be on us as taxpayers too. Like, we know there's a school board meeting every month. They're I've sat and cooked dinner and listened to it at home. You know, we can watch it online and get the information. You can show up, and I know 8:30 is a hard time to meet and whatnot, but, you know, if you have the stake in the game, then we need to show up for our community. Same with the city council meetings. And no one was at the city council meetings, and
If you show up though, but you can't get any answers, then it doesn't really do any good, right?
sure, but.
Well,
I'm asking some hard questions.
Yep.
I'm showing up to a meeting, and you cannot divulge to me what's going on.
Well,
But you know why we can't talk about that.
Not really,
but we have
not really.
We have been very transparent. It's not like we discovered something and kept it under wraps. And we stream all of our working sessions and regular board meetings. And I can go back and find the date where Sheena came to the board and said, this happened. And I can't tell you disciplinary measures on staff, but we have changed staffing.
For my
People-
staff, why can't I know?
Data privacy.
Public dollars.
There's laws about data privacy, I guess, that we have to also, I guess you can look at that past board
And
meetings.
I'm not pointing fingers at anyone
Yeah,
you guys.
but
We're
we
not
have,
trying to
if you
say
look at the board
anything.
meetings, we have changed
Address that.
staff. That is in public. When someone leaves, gets terminated, or resigns, that's part of the public board meeting. When we bring someone else in to replace a person, that hire is part of the public board
I
meeting.
would like to know what happened and what's been done to correct it so it doesn't happen
Yep.
again. That's all I'm asking.
Yep.
I like this school here.
Yep.
I put 3 kids through this school, I like it. I want it to be here for my grandkids.
Yep.
But if it's gonna be run inefficiently, then it won't be no matter how much money I throw at it. So I just think that total transparency, which means more than just saying, hey, things are running in the ditch, we need more of your money. Here's exactly what happened. We apologize for doing a bad job. Here's what we need to survive.
And I did do that at a public board meeting, but I can do it again.
I mean, I think the general populace that's not at the board meeting would like to read that in the paper or get a letter or something. I think you're owed that. I think they're owed that.
Yeah, we've had, the contractors that we've been working through this SMS, for instance, maybe you know that term or not, but, the school finance company that we go through, doing third party, has acknowledged some wrongdoing in that. And I think actually brought up at the public board meeting before was they acknowledged it in a public meeting. I think financially, they've knocked their prices down a little bit and said, let's make this right. They've changed some programming based on us. They acknowledged that we were sort of their, I call it a guinea pig for lack of a better term, but we were sort of their guinea pig of a poor finance process and have corrected that. So, I mean, I guess somewhere in there, we have acknowledged it without just jumping on some people publicly and said, hey, this is his fault, her fault, their fault, this is my fault.
Does the school have, more shares with omissions and shares with omissions?
No. What was that one?
Shares and omissions, so I have, like, if I'm doing contract selling your house and I make a mistake, I pay an insurance policy every year that says, hey, Mike screwed up, we're gonna cover the bill. So in this case here, we had I don't know how long it was that we made some mistakes, but is there no insurance there to fix that? No errors and omissions, because it's just human error, right, that caused this maybe? There's nobody to fall back on that. And maybe there just isn't in the school, I don't know. But
I don't believe so, but I can look into that.
that would help, right? If you could have maybe recaptured some money through an insurance policy or some sort of thing.
Well, you say could have. I think we're still in sort of an active mode here where we're just finding out about a lot of this, as recently as the first of the year, which is fairly recent history, trying to correct it. I think part of the other thing that we're a little gun shy on is the legal fees that go along with trying to get everything back that we are owed. For instance, pursuing $96,000 in insurance. You think the insurance company, like you said, seems obvious they would acknowledge that, but somehow there's a legal channel you need to go through, and the legal costs get bigger and bigger. I mean, every time we call that phone gets picked up. We're getting billed out at about $400 an hour.
You feel confident that you solved that problem?
Yes.
Okay, so that's fixed.
We have new staff that are taking care of those things.
And also keep in mind, I mean, yes, the snafus magnified things. This was gonna happen regardless. This isn't happening, this referendum is not because of the financial snafus that happened.
So we have an operating deficit also, and a long-term building, or are we doing?
Well,
that
we've
operation?
made major reductions this current year and next year. Because we don't get any, whether this passes or not, we still have to operate within our revenue right now. And that's generated by the number of students. So we've eliminated quite a few positions and made cuts. We continue to work on that so that we will be in the black moving forward.
So forever, or next year do we do this again?
Depends on our enrollment. Right now, we don't have a lot of extra funding to get us through a drop of 20, 30 kids again.
Which is possible.
It's always possible.
We could be doing this again next year, asking for the same thing.
Yes, I mean, if things stay the same and we don't increase some of our revenue.
One thing, and I don't know if you watched Miller's previous presentation, and I didn't realize this, but it was very surprising to me. They mentioned that $24 per pupil is our how much the community is funding, the taxpayers are funding right now. You go to any other community around here, it's at least $300 a kid, if not $700 a kid, and I think Lancaster's at $1,000 a kid. Everyone else is investing way more in their kids than our community is, and I was a little surprised by that.
What, how many kids do we have in school?
36.
So $250,000 is all you're getting out of the local tax bills.
You just
No,
multiply
that's
that
on
with-
the voter approved operating.
Yeah.
How much do we get from the taxpayers?
I would, it's 740 some total.
It's just way more than $24 a kid.
Okay,
But that's
that,
referendum.
That's the referendum.
The referendum.
Yes, it's 24.
that's also the same with those other ones too, those $300.
That's just on referendum.
That's just on referendum.
And the last time we did a referendum was,
We renewed one in 2017.
yeah.
The last time we passed one was 2007.
Yep. 07 was the last time that anybody ever went to the taxpayers to ask for extra, for an
That's a
operating.
long time to do the referendum.
Yep. We really are behind, and then again, you can look at the rest of the communities around here. And I will tell you right now, I was surprised by that. I did not realize how much more everyone else was putting in operating referendums and such compared to us.
Yeah, I think when you say mistakes, Mike, I mean, I've been on the board, 13 years now, whatever. We should have been talking about it. We were talking about this back when we renewed it in 2017, said, hey, should we, up the ante? And at the time, we said, okay, we can survive with what we got. We're talking 7 years ago, so quite a bit of enrollment loss since then. And then you kick a COVID thing, and great excuse, everybody uses COVID, but there was a stasis in terms of that thought process for about 2 years, 3 years, but we should have been doing this 5 years ago. It should have been unrelated, like Boyd says, to current financial mishaps. It should be just something that the public should be scrutinizing without that distraction. They should be looking at it saying, we got a school that we built in '92, beautiful school. I'm trying to remember the numbers Seth threw at us, but in terms of value of the school, in terms of insurance value, this building is dramatically more expensive than it was to the course of almost 7 times the value that it was in the original building. And so replacing things are becoming a problem again. Like you said, the funds that we set aside to address yearly problems just aren't keeping up. Should have been done, I'm going to say 5 years ago for a round number. So.
For when you're saying that property taxes increase, but we're not getting an increase in the percentage that we're getting, right?
We get $7,300 a kid.
Right, but so our taxes increase, but we're not getting a change in that. Is that a statewide legislation? Is like every county experiencing that where property taxes are going up, but schools aren't getting more money from that?
They touched on that a little, again, the rural school districts declining enrollment all the way through, and that's what they were talking about, even looking at special legislation.
Right, okay, so that was in regards to that, okay.
But I think people are more savvy about how school finance works, and again, it's an animal that, I don't know if you could go into a public accounting machine and survive it, but you certainly are surviving school finance, which is just a different creature, I think, but those school districts, the Lancasters, we keep bad-mouthing, but for looking far enough ahead and saying, we need to do this. And they've got it's not $1,000, it's a $1,300 referendum per child there, we're at $24. We didn't look far enough ahead quickly, I think, and would have been already doing this or having done it or seen what the public would do.
To correct you on that, I'm not bad-mouthing them, I'm impressed that
Yeah,
they went to their voters and their voters are backing them to that level.
And also, I'm not trying to make anything sound bad, but I mean, I go to the Lancaster school about once a year at least for sports, and their school is old.
Yep.
It's but I mean, they're maintaining it and they're using it. It's not like they have a brand new building.
I used to, I worked for Two Rivers Watershed, which is based out of Hallock. One of the guys that I knew, he was the mayor of Lancaster, and he showed me around their school. Their school's like 100 years old. They put lots of money, and he told me they fund a lot of, the cheapest way to run a school is to keep the building you have in good condition, and Lancaster's a perfect example of making that happen.
And I think having 3 separate questions is very important, because at least if we can get the first one or the second one passed, it will still help in the state. I live in Roselle County, and even seeing my home value from the last 5 years go from $150,000 to $400,000. It's hard, but then you have to look at the children go to school too. Even Roselle, I voted yes for our new school. We couldn't afford to finish it. It's sitting unfinished, just because of the cost of everything going up. So we drive by and it's like, oh, look at the front of the building. But that's just what happened after COVID. Everything just skyrocketed.
And I think Rosa, it wasn't at $224 per child.
Oh, it's
for the
higher.
voters.
Yeah.
And that's, that's our neighboring county, so I can't remember if Coaching was on there or not. I have no idea. I don't think it was on that chart,
No,
was it?
Morrow's wasn't, and Morrow's was passed.
Warroad's wasn't, but Rose's was.
That's what concerns me about asking, you can put a minimal impact on those tax statements, I think you saw in there, but the $300,000 effort almost seems like a Band-Aid at this point that we're going to be reviewing in 2 years. If You know, I mean, if we don't get the cost of the windows, I know we got a quote on it, but that's gonna change again if we go back next September and ask them again for, you know, building costs, inflation, whatever it is. But are we just sort of slapping a Band-Aid on it? And that's where I'm sort of changing my mind when I view all this and say, we need to push for something a little more. But I guess that's where I want to know what the public thinks, and that's why I'm glad Mike, you come and at least talk about it. You know, the public needs to know, and
Some of it's,
I assume we're gonna put in margin windows this time.
yeah.
Well, we can't say that, I've talked about that. Well, you have to go with the lowest bidder. There's
Also mistake.
I'm not, I agree wholeheartedly with you, but you still have to go with the lowest bidder. So let's put it this way, I really hope they're the lowest bidder.
And I think in general, when you look just at our building and facilities, I think we have done a good job over the years of maintaining it. Sometimes people walk in and say this building's 30 years old. But some of it, the windows and some of the concrete stuff, we just can't keep pace with some
I
of
totally agree with you.
those major
I've shown
things.
property to new people that come to the community, always driving by the school, go, look at this, and I'm like, wow, that's pretty awesome.
So,
At the same time, we have to make sure we're
yep.
super frugal about raising taxes on people, because we'll get people to stop coming here.
Yep. So I think it needs to be a
People don't want
balance.
to open up a business because the taxes are too high. Roseville County is facing that right now. There's a lot of people that their taxes are way up. They're going, that's it, I'm out of here. So now it's counterproductive, you're gonna lose students, right?
Yeah.
So it's a give and take.
vicious cycle.
It is, and again, sometimes you can do this too, right out the back door. So I don't know what that is, and I know I don't wanna bring up some of these things, but you know, what does the pool cost us here? I swim in the pool. I like it. I voted for it. I want to keep it, but we never have figured out what it actually costs.
It's one of your line items on your taxes.
And I think that this is a shout out to Doug Nelson, you know, but he wasn't wrong with, I want to know what it costs. I can't make good choices if I don't know that. Maybe the pool does have to get shut down for 3 months, you know, that it's so dang expensive. I don't know. You don't know. You can't make good choices if you don't know.
Problem is shutting the pool down 3 months in the winter is not gonna avoid any expense that way.
Well,
It's gonna cost us whether we shut it down or run it. You might as well make
and I'm using it as an example.
Yep.
It's a cost that we don't know. So I think it's a real thing that we should figure out for sure. And maybe there's other things like that. But hard for you guys to make good choices if you don't really know.
I think that the timing of all this is a little unfortunate with some of the recent things that have come to light. Because we've been talking about needing the windows for at least a couple of years, you know, so. It's just that now it's come down to, now it's time to, it's past time to take some action on that.
And you're right. In fact, we've talked about putting articles in the paper to try and tell people what went on as much as we can. Again, we're hamstrung slightly, but I don't know. I think we've given you the information, but I'm sure you can figure things out.
I think just like that would be a good way to say it in a public forum, not just here. Here's what's happened, we made corrective action, should never happen again. That's accountability, right? That's, I think, what people want. It's transparency.
It's in the school board minutes, right?
Oh, yeah.
The minutes are posted.
The minutes are posted, but the detail, there's not a lot of detail in the minutes. So you would have to go back and look at the recordings of the meetings
I
too.
think that would strengthen what you're trying to do.
Look, I agree with you.
Nobody wants to do that, I'm sure, but it would strengthen your chances of a referendum.
And same, my question, and they didn't quite address it, but, for like the building, okay, you can figure $1 million for windows or whatever it is. We have to redo some of the brickwork and some other stuff. And then you add on for whatever unforeseen, so this is why we're asking you for this amount of money. I think that would go a long ways towards people accepting it.
More detailed question.
Yeah, I mean, instead of just like the way that some of it's worded and vague questions, like, yeah, just write us a blank check and trust us on it, and we'll make sure we do everything the right way. Well, no, I mean, kind of like what you're saying, how are you gonna spend the money, how is it gonna be used, etc. That's what we need to get across.
like that, volunteers and putting the back row.
All in favor of Tim?
Aye.
Aye.
Motion
Aye.
carries.
Who invited Reed?
That's democracy. So, anyone else have any questions? Anything like that? Otherwise, have we answered kind of? Okay. Otherwise, I think we'll probably kind of wrap it up here.
Adjourn?
Oh, what time do you want to set a meeting? Do we need to do that while the microphone's on or not?
Probably be best.
Well, I would like us to find a date, like next week.
Thank you very much for coming.
Yeah, appreciate it. Yeah, thanks everyone for coming.
So any day next week? Is there a better time? I suppose it has to be after 5 or 5:30.
According to this, I'm only.
It'd have to be starting at 5:30,
5:30.
unless
What day did
it's
you
Wednesday.
reschedule the buildings and grounds for?
The 11th,
The 11th.
Yes, that's next Thursday.
that's next Thursday.
Should we do it? Want to do the,
Or if there's another time that works better, I can just get my afternoon route off.
Those kids can walk.
That's right.
Thursday we'll do buildings and grounds at 4
Sure.
and a special
Oh,
working
4,
session.
not 3. The other one
What
was
did
3.
I can get my times mixed up.
The other one was 3, but I'm not sure on that email that he sent out. Unless I had it on my calendar wrong, which is
So-
possibility.
Is this on the 11th?
On the 11th,
Week from Thursday?
I thought I said 4. I have a custodial buildings and grounds meeting on tomorrow at 3.
Okay.
Well, that's where our initial,
I-
original one on the 4th was scheduled for 3.
Or 3.
Yeah.
So the one
So
on,
I just moved it, okay,
so the one on the 11th I have
at 4.
at 4. And that shouldn't take more than an hour and a half, and then we could do a special session at 5:30.
Sure.
Does that seem reasonable? And that'll just be just another working session similar to this with no board action, just discussion and try to come up with our next steps. But I'm assuming we'd want to have it, well, it will be open to the public and we'll be streaming it again, I'm assuming.
Well, let's stream it. Let's definitely stream it.
Okay. That's all I have.
Okay.
Thank you.